How did a blind street musician reach one of the world's biggest stages? Nahuel Pennisi stands before the biggest names in Latin music at the Latin Grammy Awards, a standing ovation erupting around him. Years earlier, he was performing anonymously on the sidewalks of Buenos Aires, nothing but a guitar and a small donation can between him and silence. Born blind, raised in a modest home in Florencio Varela, shaped by a grandfather who refused to let him be fragile, his journey would take him through heartbreak, a near-fatal bus crash in Bolivia, and a reinvention no one saw coming. Nahuel Pennisi entered the world on October 19, 1990, in Florencio Varela, a working-class suburb on the southern edge of Buenos Aires. From his first breath, blindness was simply a fact of life, not a sentence. The Pennisi home was small and often stretched thin, with his mother, Fabiana, describing days when work was uncertain and money was measured out carefully. Yet inside those walls, possibility was never rationed. Each day began with the ordinary sounds of a neighborhood waking up, vendors calling, radios humming, the distant clang of a train. And for young Nahuel, every note was a thread in the fabric of his world. His parents faced the realities of raising a blind child with a mix of worry and resolve, but there was no space for pity. Instead, the house filled up with music and gentle encouragement. Instruments were rare treasures, sometimes arriving only after months of saving, or as gifts from relatives who understood the power of a single chord to change a life. Nahuel's earliest memories are of exploring a battered keyboard by touch, his hands mapping out melodies long before he spoke of dreams or ambitions. In the Pennisi household, love took the form of patience and trust. The family's limited means never defined what Nahuel could imagine for himself. Blindness was part of the landscape, but it never blocked the horizon. Each day, resilience grew quietly inside the rhythm of ordinary life, a lesson that would echo through every stage of his journey. At 4 years old, Nahuel's hands found their way across the keys of a battered keyboard, searching for melodies in the dark. The instrument was a rare treasure, passed around the family like a secret, and he treated it with a kind of reverence. Sound became his first language. By the time he started school, a heavy electric bass, gifted by his grandfather René, became his constant companion. He sat cross-legged on the floor, the instrument resting on a cushion, feeling the vibrations in his chest, inventing harmonies that no one had shown him. When that bass was lost, he turned to a guitar, not out of choice, but necessity. The guitar was built for a right-handed player, but Nahuel, left-handed and undaunted, flipped it over and created his own way. He never learned from books or diagrams. Every chord, every song came from listening and repeating over and over until the music became part of him. His inverted lap-style technique, left-hand fretting, right-hand plucking, confused teachers and amazed classmates. In 3rd grade, he brought his guitar to school and played for the class. The room fell silent. The teacher's expression changed. For the first time, those around him saw not just a child navigating blindness, but a musician with a gift that needed no explanation. In that moment, music stopped being a pastime. It became his identity. René Pennisi believed that the greatest gift he could offer his grandson was not protection, but freedom. While others hesitated, fearing the world's sharp edges for a blind child, René quietly chose a different path. He let Nahuel walk on his own, even if it meant stumbling. He watched as the boy reached for objects, missed them, tried again, and learned not just the shape of things, but the meaning of persistence. When Nahuel wanted to explore the backyard or cross a busy room, René stood close enough to catch him if needed, but never close enough to block the way. Mistakes were not met with scolding or rescue, but with gentle encouragement to try again. Over time, Nahuel's confidence grew, not from being told he was special, but from the knowledge that he could solve problems himself. Years later, Nahuel would say that no one shaped his life more deeply than René. The lessons of those early days, risk, failure, and the quiet pride of figuring things out alone became the psychological foundation for every leap he would take. Long before he faced the judgment of strangers or the pressure of a stage, he had already learned what it meant to trust himself. In René's eyes, dignity was not something given, but something earned through experience. That belief became Nahuel's compass, guiding him through every challenge that followed. At 16, Nahuel Pennisi stepped onto Florida Street with nothing but his guitar, a folding stool, and the quiet encouragement of his grandmother, Marisa. The city's busiest pedestrian avenue became his first real stage. On that morning, Marisa walked beside him, guiding him through the noise and rush of downtown Buenos Aires. She stayed near as he set up, then faded into the crowd, trusting him to find his way. Nahuel played for strangers, tourists, office workers, street vendors, each note carried by the echo of passing footsteps. The open air sharpened his senses. Every reaction from the crowd, every coin dropped into his donation can, became a lesson in connection. He learned quickly that music on the street wasn't just performance, it was a conversation. Some listeners paused, drawn by the inverted guitar across his lap and the honesty in his voice. Others hurried by, but a few stopped long enough to share their own stories or simply to listen. These encounters, sometimes brief and sometimes deeply moving, shaped his understanding of people and gave him a sense of belonging in the world beyond his family's home. With each day, his confidence grew. The street became a training ground for his voice and stage presence. The money he earned, sometimes modest, sometimes generous, was set aside for a dream: to record his first demo. That homemade tape would carry his music beyond the sidewalks, catching the attention of people who could open new doors. Through the hum of the city, Nahuel discovered that music could belong to everyone, and that dignity is something you carry with you, no matter where you play. The first notes of Nahuel's homemade demo drifted out of a borrowed recorder and landed in the hands of people who recognized something rare. Soon, radio producers in Cordoba began to call, and invitations to small folk festivals arrived. The leap from sidewalk to stage happened almost overnight. On national television, his inverted guitar and clear voice caught the attention of viewers across Argentina. But it was the Cosquín National Festival in 2009 that changed everything. There, standing among seasoned musicians and hopeful newcomers, Nahuel performed an original song and won first place in the unpublished song contest. The applause that night was more than approval. It was an open door into the heart of Argentina's folk tradition. Word spread quickly. Respected artists in the folk community took notice, and one of them, the legendary guitarist Luis Salinas, asked Nahuel to join him for a concert. Salinas's encouragement wasn't just a compliment, it was a signal that the young musician's place was now among peers and mentors, not just passers-by. With every new invitation, Nahuel's reputation deepened. He was no longer just the blind boy playing for coins. He was an artist whose music resonated far beyond the busy streets of Buenos Aires. Each step forward was earned, and each note carried the quiet pride of someone who knew that belonging comes through persistence, not permission. In 2013, Nahuel Pennisi left Argentina with nothing but his guitar, a backpack, and the ache of a broken heart. The road ahead was uncertain, stretching north through Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. He traveled alone, guided not by sight, but by instinct and a stubborn will to keep moving. Each city brought a new test, plazas bustling with strangers, unfamiliar rhythms echoing off old stone, the challenge of earning enough for a meal or a bed. He played wherever people gathered, a park bench in Quito, a crowded square in Lima, the shaded steps of a Bolivian mercado. Sometimes the music brought coins, sometimes only silence, but always a chance to connect. Nights blurred into mornings, and Nahuel learned to trust the kindness of people he could not see. A vendor offered bread, a fellow traveler shared a story, a family let him sleep on their floor. Improvisation became survival. He adapted his set to the mood of each crowd, sometimes singing folk ballads, sometimes inventing melodies on the spot. Heartbreak had sent him onto the road, but the journey itself became a lesson in resilience, a test of how far hope and music could carry one young man across a continent. On a winding road in the Bolivian Andes, a bus carrying Nahuel Pennisi began to shudder and slip. The brakes had failed. Metal screeched against rock, passengers cried out, and the vehicle lurched toward the edge of a ravine. In that suspended moment, Nahuel, unable to see the chaos around him, listened to the sounds of panic and prayed for the world to stop spinning. The bus finally came to rest, battered but intact, perched at the brink. 21 lives were lost in that crash on March 28, 2013. Nahuel survived, shaken but alive, carrying with him the memory of metal twisting and voices fading into silence. In the days after, grief and gratitude tangled together. The heartbreak that had driven him onto the road now mingled with the raw knowledge of how thin the line is between life and its absence. He found himself writing melodies that trembled with urgency, lyrics that searched for meaning in the space between survival and surrender. Danger and heartbreak no longer felt like separate storms. They became part of the same weather inside him. Returning home to Argentina, Nahuel was changed. The songs that began to pour from his guitar were sharper, braver, and more honest than anything he had written before. The experience in Bolivia had burned away any hesitation. He was no longer only a survivor. He was an author of his own story, ready to turn every scar into a song. Nahuel Pennisi's first independent album did not arrive by accident or luck. It was the result of years spent listening, absorbing, and shaping each note until it carried his own fingerprint. In 2012, he entered the studio with a clear purpose: to make a record that honored the folk traditions of his homeland, while refusing to sound like anyone but himself. The sessions were intimate, built around the sound of his inverted guitar and the honesty of his voice. At his side was songwriter Leon Couillet, a creative partner who challenged and encouraged him in equal measure. Together, they wrote and arranged songs that balanced the pulse of samba and chacarera with melodies that reached beyond the boundaries of genre. Nahuel insisted on preserving the unique timbre of his lap-style guitar, even as Cuye suggested broader arrangements and subtle touches of modern instrumentation. The result was a collection of songs that felt both rooted and new, music that belonged to Argentina but spoke to anyone who had ever searched for their own voice. The album built its audience slowly, not through marketing, but through word of mouth, radio play, and the quiet power of authenticity. Each track was a statement. Resilience is not just survival, but the courage to shape your own language and share it with the world. A handshake with Sony Music Argentina in 2015 changed the scale of Nahuel Pennisi's world, but not its center. The contract offered global distribution and a professional studio, yet Nahuel insisted on keeping the sound of his inverted guitar at the heart of every track. The sessions for his first major label album, Primavera, brought together seasoned musicians and longtime collaborator Leon Cuye. Recording took place at Mundo Studio in Buenos Aires, where folk rhythms met subtle pop arrangements, and the honesty of Nahuel's voice remained untouched. Critics praised the album's poetic intimacy, and listeners across Argentina found themselves drawn in by melodies that felt both familiar and new. Commercial success soon followed. Primavera climbed into Argentina's top 10 albums, and Nahuel earned his first Latin Grammy nomination for Best Folk Album in 2016. For a musician who once played for coins on Florida Street, the nomination was more than recognition. It was proof that dignity and conviction could carry an artist from local acclaim to the international stage. Through it all, Nahuel's music held to its roots. Fame widened his audience, but the core of his artistry, resilience, humility, and the courage to sound only like himself remained unshaken. Spotlight swept across the stage as Nahuel Pennisi waited in the wings, guitar resting on his lap, heart pounding against his chest. The Latin Grammy Awards, one of the most watched nights in Latin music, stretched out before him, a vast sea of expectation and invisible faces. Behind the curtain, fear pressed in close, as real as the silence that hung in the air. Nahuel gripped the neck of his guitar, breathing in the memory of crowded sidewalks and the steady encouragement of his family. Every lesson in resilience, every stumble and recovery seemed to echo in that moment. When his name was called, he stepped forward into the light. The hall fell quiet, the kind of hush that only comes when something honest is about to happen. Fingers found their place on the strings. The first notes rang out, clear, trembling with vulnerability and hope. Nahuel's voice carried through the auditorium, reaching not just ears, but something deeper, something shared. For a few minutes, time seemed to slow. The music rose and fell, weaving together past and present, struggle and gratitude. As the final chord faded, the silence broke. Applause swept over him, rising to a standing ovation. Strangers stood shoulder to shoulder, united in recognition. In that ovation, Nahuel was no longer the boy from Florencio Varela or the busker on Florida Street. He was an artist welcomed by the world, his journey measured not by what he lacked, but by the courage and dignity that carried him to this stage. Nahuel Pennisi's music now carries weight far beyond the studio or the festival stage. When he was chosen to perform the Argentine national anthem at the opening of the 2022 Copa America, the invitation was more than ceremonial. It was a public acknowledgement of trust and belonging. his voice, filled with the same honesty that once echoed through the streets, resonated across a nation. Over time, collaborations with renowned artists like Abel Pintos, Teresa Parodi, and Chango Spasiuk have woven his sound deeper into the fabric of Latin American music. The Gardel Awards arrived in succession, first as Best New Artist in 2018, then for Best Folk Album in 2020, each trophy a quiet affirmation of his enduring artistry. Yet through every accolade and each new partnership, Nahuel has refused to trade his singular style for mainstream approval. The inverted guitar remains at the center, his songs still shaped by the dignity and independence that first carried him from Florencio Varela to the world stage. Universo Paralelo began as a quiet melody on Nahuel's inverted guitar, but quickly grew into something that neither he nor his listeners could contain. The song was born from the raw aftermath of loss and survival, its lyrics tracing the fragile border between despair and hope. When Nahuel sang about parallel worlds and the ache of what might have been, he wasn't just telling his own story. He was opening a door for anyone who had ever felt suspended between heartbreak and possibility. Released in 2020, Universo Paralelo soared across Latin America, carried by radio waves and word of mouth. The song's emotional honesty spoke to young fans and older generations alike, each finding their own reflection in its verses. Streaming numbers climbed into the millions, but the true measure of its reach was more intimate. Strangers sending messages, families sharing the song at kitchen tables, new audiences discovering Nahuel's music for the first time. In every chorus, the connection between artist and listener felt both immediate and enduring, a reminder that authenticity can travel farther than fame. Home is where Nahuel Pennisi finds his truest strength. With Mayra De Leo, his partner and later his wife, he built a life that balances the demands of music with the quiet rituals of family. The birth of their son, Mateo, brought a new dimension to his world, a daily reminder that love is both grounding and expansive. Nahuel often speaks of how his family anchors him, describing moments when the laughter of his child or the gentle presence of Mayra restores his sense of purpose. Gratitude, not limitation, shapes his days. Blindness for Nahuel is a physical detail, not a barrier to imagination. He experiences each moment through sound, touch, scent, and the pulse of emotion, conjuring landscapes and colors in his mind's eye. He draws a clear line between what the body cannot do and what the mind dares to dream, insisting that dignity is found in how one chooses to live, not in the obstacles faced. For Nahuel, authenticity and humility are not performances. They are the quiet foundation on which every song, every relationship, and every hope is built. In every note Nahuel Pennisi plays, we witness the quiet revolution of turning obstacles into artistry. Today, his music reaches millions, not despite blindness, but by embracing a unique vision of dignity and courage. As audiences search for meaning in uncertain times, his journey reminds us, real limitation lives in the mind, not the body. The world listens, and hope answers. Share your thoughts and join the conversation below.